Welcome back, everyone. I'm Andrea Hicks. I'm the Director of Sustainability Education and Research for the Office of Sustainability here at UW-Madison. We're now moving into our panel discussion on climate courage stories. I'm excited to introduce you to all the incredible people we have up on stage with us tonight for what's sure to be a really wonderful conversation. Tonight's discussion will be led by Kira Adkins, a legal studies and environmental studies student who is graduating in May. I know, right? She has to be so busy, and she's like here helping us out. That's great. Kira is also part of the Nelson Institute's Community and Environmental Scholars Program. We're also lucky to be joined by 4 great panelists. Gary Besaw is director of the Menominee Tribal Department of Agriculture and Food Systems and director of the Menominee Tribal Food Distribution Program. Besaw has served on the Menominee Tribal Legislature for 15 years, twice holding positions as tribal chairman and once each as vice chairman and secretary. We should clap, right, for all of them? Yes. Dekila Chungyalpa, whom you've already met, is the director of the Loka initiative. She also sits on the board or advisory committee for several organizations, including Green the Church, the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology, Midwest Environmental Advocates, and the Society of Conservation's Biology, Religion, and Conservation Working Group. John Francis, also known as the Planet Walker, is an author, educator, and traveler. He is the founder of Planet Walk, a nonprofit environmental awareness organization, and is an education fellow and explorer at the National Geographic Society. He has written numerous books, including his latest children's book, Human Kindness: True Stories of Compassion. John was also a visiting associate professor for the Nelson Institute and served on the Nelson Institute Board of Visitors. And finally, Chris Kilgour is the outreach manager for the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies and founder of Color in the Outdoors. Through his work, Christopher widens support, advocacy, and engagement in diversifying perspectives and participants in the outdoor world and our relationship to it. Okay, for Chris. Unfortunately, Dr. Jonathan Patz, who was also originally going to join this panel, was unable to attend due to unforeseen circumstances. He is no longer able to join us today, but sends his best for a fruitful discussion. It says, please help me welcome our panel, but I think we already did, one at a time. So with that, Kira, I'll pass this over to you.
Hello. Okay. So first I want to introduce myself. Segu Swegu Kirani Yagyat Atnawa Niwagi Talota Anyota Aga Niwagu Hujota. Kira is my name, Turtle is my clan, Oneida, people of the Standing Stone are my people, the Haudenosaunee Nation. I just wanted to do that little introduction, get everybody warm, comfortable, to have a really cool discussion about these questions that I made for the 4 very distinguished people sitting up here today. So first we're going to start off really light, and we're going to say, I'd love to start with hearing about what inspired you to work in the environmental field. Please start with your name, and then in 1 minute, can you give us the highlights of the path that brought you to the work that you do today? Yeah, you're first to go.
So then we mark on Oscar Powers and Sweden. Thought to Manuit Ayowit Awasa, Menominee, Inani, Nishikni, Natawam, Cartman, which kicked him. So I said my clan is Bear Clan, so I'm a speaker and keeper of the law. That's my role. I am also, my real name that I pray with every morning is Oscar Powers. And that's, well, it means ceremonial attendant in our language. In the ancient way, it means a speaker and translator. So that's who I am. What was the other part now?
So what inspired you to get into environmental work? And then what does the path look like for the work that you do today?
The path, it's interesting. The Menominee tribe, the Menominee people, were considered one of the most prosperous tribal nations in the whole United States, out of the whole Turtle Island. And because of that, when the U.S. government wanted to get out of the Indian business, they thought, let's terminate or let's cease all of that what they called a special consideration for Native Americans, and let's start with those very successful tribes first. So it'll look good anyway. They'll do something well, and it'll look like it was a good plan. Well, it was not a good plan. We don't follow those precepts of owning the air, owning the water, owning the land, owning the animals, the birds. Don't fit with us. We're part of it. So as we start walking that path of trying to come back to restoring ourselves as a tribal people, we found others were trying to take advantage of our land. So we are the forest. We never had vaults or coffins back in the day. You were buried under the ground. If it was winter, maybe you were up in a tree. They buried you until springtime and buried you under the ground. But as those bodies then started to decompose, you may have eaten a deer or bear or something that ate berries that grew out of the nutrients that your ancestors' body fed. All of that energy just recirculates, and we are that. And to me, that's more important than anything. So we are forest people, and we still are to this day.
I love that. We are forest people too. So I grew up in the Himalayas. I come from a place called Sikkim. I am Bhutia. We are a tribal community that's Indo-Tibetan. And I grew up, as I said earlier, I grew up in really pristine. I have to do this because, all of land, actually, humans have been working and living harmoniously in many places around the world, but in essence, managing land, right? So this idea of pristine is very colonial, but I'll put that aside. But I grew up in this wilderness area. My mother and my grandmother were Tibetan Buddhist nuns, and so I grew up in a family of very serious practitioners, and that meant my mother spent a lot of time in wilderness areas, in remote areas, doing her practices, and my only entertainment was wildlife. So I grew up just watching and being fascinated by wildlife. And when I was 15, my family sent me to the US to study because I was good in science. And then I came back and said, I'm going to be an environmental scientist. And everybody was like, no, not that kind of science. We want you to be a doctor. But it was already in my DNA and in my heart that I was going to do wildlife work and I was going to do environmental work. And, for all the moments of hopelessness and despair, there is just this spring of eternal joy. Because every time things are hard, I can sink myself. And like you said, I just have to sink myself and remember how baby elephants run, and how whales move and sing to one another. And it's like, I'm okay. It's good to be an environmentalist, yeah.
I don't know if I want to go, because I'm not going to. What brought me, is that the question? What brought me to the outdoor and then brought me to this world? I would say growing up in a space where I looked out the window every day and saw ducks and squirrels and raccoons, and I was fortunate enough to grow up on a park here in Madison and have lakes on either end. I think the interesting thing about that is that I always have known being outside, but I think I grew up in that era where that was where we were sent. Get out of the house, go do something. Don't come back until the streetlights come on. So I look at that as a very fortunate opportunity to have grown up in that space. I was taught from a very, very young age from both my family, my immediate family, but also my larger family that you are, again, part of the nature that you spend time in. and that's why it's important, because you're taking care of your family. You're taking care of the world around you, which is part of who you are, and vice versa. And I would say that I think the thing that really drove me to really making this my passion was to see the passion in my parents' eyes and hearing it in their voices, and trying to make sure that my sister and I and my friends and I and my extended family and I knew how important and how wonderful a space it was, and how fortunate we were to be able to enjoy that space. And I think that has, in a very circuitous way, has consistently been the stream of the importance of taking care of the planet, because we know it takes care of us.
Well, I'm not going to say anything. I was born on the East Coast of Philadelphia. I spent, my name is John Francis, and I was born on the East Coast in the city of Philadelphia. I spent my summers in Harmony Village, a small town in Virginia, with my aunt and uncle. We lived in a place where there was no electricity, no running water. They grew all their food, and I spent my summers there, and I didn't like it. I liked being in the city where you could flip on the switch and everything. And I moved to California in 1969, and 1971 I witnessed an oil spill. And that oil spill, 2 tankers collided beneath the Golden Gate Bridge, impacted me in such a way that I had to give up riding in motorized vehicles. And that's because of the deaths of seabirds that I was very close to, birds. And so I gave up riding in motorized vehicles, and I didn't know what I was doing, except it seemed like that was the only thing I could do, was not drive the cars that use the oil. And I started walking, and during the time I started walking, I lived in a place called Point Reyes, which is a very beautiful place and very close to how it was when it was. And I argued with people so much about what one person could do that on my 27th birthday, I decided to stop speaking for one day. The one day lasted 17 years, and the walking lasted 22 years. And during that time, I just let myself listen and hear from people, from the environment, until I walked across the United States, gathering my education from the road, from the trees, from the animals, from the universities academically, until I arrived here in Madison. I did my PhD in environmental studies while not speaking, and carried on into the East Coast, back to Philadelphia, and started speaking in Washington, D.C. on the 20th anniversary of Earth Day, because I wanted to speak for the environment. And the environment had changed from being just about pollution, which I thought it was, and it changed to be about how we treated each other, because what I learned is that we're all part of the environment, and how we treat one another manifests in the physical environment around us. So environment became about human rights and gender equality and economic equity, civil rights, all the ways that we relate to one another. And I'm passionate about that, and I continue to listen and learn from the environment, and that means all the people around me, as I am right here learning right now from all of you and all of you.
Thank you very much. I think what I love the most about everybody's story is the individuality of it all. Gary, about the story of the forest, leading into your story of how you grew up with the forest in the Himalayas, and then Chris talking about his outside world, and John Francis, just like you speaking about how your relationship with the land had to be cultivated over those years of not speaking. So I think that's really cool, and it kind of goes into that next question, which is, So there's no denying that doing the work of protecting and caring for our planet and all the beings on it is very hard. There are so many emotions that come with doing this work. So much is carried with us. It's either anger, guilt, joy, despair. I just want anybody can go first, of course, but could you share with us all a time when you were faced with a really challenging moment and specifically the progression of emotions that you went through? And what I specifically really want to hear about is how you cared for these emotions. Did you kind of sit with it for a very long time? Is it something that you thought about for years on end? Or is it something that you kind of just like do throughout your work? That specifically is something that I'm really interested in hearing about. And like I said, anybody can go first, so. No, don't go all go at once, please.
We're practicing our John.
Yeah, we're. You're gonna have to name somebody.
Okay, Chris, you gotta go first.
Why
now.
do you have to- oh.
You're looking dead at me.
So yeah, I guess I would say probably one of the most challenging times in my life. I was 26 years old, and was running a business, and things were going well, and kind of living life and enjoying life, and spending a lot of time outdoors and doing all kinds of different things. And the 27th of January, had a severe stroke that left me paralyzed and blind, and left me clinically dead, and put me in the neurological ICU for 2 weeks. And in process of being in there, I was blind and paralyzed for the most part, so I could hear, but I couldn't really move very well. Hearing the doctor talk to my parents and saying, you might want to think about funeral arrangements, because we're not sure he's going to make it out, and if he does, he probably won't walk or see again. And I had some explicit words to say about that, and said, I'm not quite done yet. And the thing that I really, I mean, you hear these stories about people that lose senses, that go blind, or that lose their hearing, and then those other senses become more pronounced. And I would say that was after getting out of the hospital, it took almost 9 months to recover enough to kind of function in the way that I was used to. And during that time, your senses really do different things for you. And there was moments of kind of complete hopelessness and thinking, well, like, what's next? Like, what am I going to do? But there was this constant voice in my head of like, I'm not done yet. Like, I have things to do. And it was the sounds of the outdoors. It was the sounds of hearing the wind and hearing the birds and hearing the trees initially. And then my sight started coming back, and how that gift was even more pronounced. And being able to see that outdoor world that I enjoyed and loved so much, and being like, that's where I want to be. I don't want to give in yet, because that's where I want to be. And I think that's really what continued. And so there is that nature theme ultimately throughout my entire life of like, that is what kept me going, and that is what got me back. And so I think that was the easiest way to deal with all of those things is, in order to get there, I have to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of kept me from losing hope and losing faith in the fact that I was going to get there. I was just too stubborn and I guess too ornery to to not go back outside.
Yeah.
And so that kind of drove me to get there. Yeah.
Thank you. That was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I got to call on somebody. Gary.
All right. Well, there are several. First of all, a disclaimer, because I'm not tribal chair now, the spokesman for our tribe is the tribal chairperson. They are, so I sound like an attorney now. But I've been ruined by many attorneys. I'm a recovering tribal chairman. It just happens that way. Hang on. But when we looked at, there were several things. When we were terminated and we were looking at becoming restored, we were at one time we had 10 to 12 million acres of land that we were responsible to see and care for and be a part of. After all of the tribal concessions, treaties, we were down to less than 250,000 acres of land that we had oversight on and that we would protect. In fact, NASA used to tell us back in the day, as they would go by, they would help set coordinates by the outline of our reservation, even in northeast Wisconsin with state and federal forests there. That's how pronounced our methods of forestry were, and how vigorous and untouched much of that land was in a certain sense. But in another way, our foresters made sure that this was probably the most touched piece of forest around, because they knew things. They would look at it, they would look at the forest and say, based on these trees that are, or these shrubs that are growing here, the best type of tree is X or Y. So they would know what that sister tree would be. So we divided up our reservation into, we divided our reservation into over 100 sections. And every 15 years, our foresters would go to each section and look at the land and say, these trees are getting pretty old and stunted. When we come back in 15 years, they're going to have lost vigor. Maybe they'll have dropped by then. Or they'll say, based on the type of trees here, these ones shouldn't be here. They should go somewhere else. So we rotated and made those types of cuts through the forest. When we were terminated, they looked at, now Menominee, you've got to pay taxes. Huh? What's taxes? So you have to do that. And we all had parcels that we lived on, but we didn't understand that full process, because that was originally in 1961 where we were terminated, and we didn't understand that. It was actually 54, but in 61, and it was strange. It's a whole different world, and I struggled with that. My parents struggled with that. They tried to turn us into parks. They said, well, let's make you a state wilderness park. We'll set everything up. And we said, no. Well, let's let you be a part of one of the other counties. Menominee County isn't existing. You're not going to have that. No, we wanted control over what we could have for us, for Menominee people. But it was a struggle. It was a fight. It was a fight all the way through. In fact, one of the alumni ate a deer. She eventually had been the lead that pushed us to restore ourselves back to tribal status, back to that reservation status. So we have a storied past, and we try to keep people off our res as much as we can. We're a closed res. We don't let people in our forest. That's a knee-jerk thing, some people would say, but the forest doesn't belong to me. There are 9,000 approximately in Menominee, and we are all responsible for every tree, for every deer, for every berry bush. It's common, the land. And we wanted to make sure we kept that control, that we could do that, because we had a lot of old teachings that we still don't share, but that are there, and they have to be. And modern science is catching up with some of those now. They really are, with some of those stories. I mean, it's happening. Trees talk to themselves. Oh my God. Yep. They're smarter than us.
Ooh. Thank you for that. Can I get to you to share a story?
So the hardest year as an environmentalist for me was 2009. A president that I think all environmentalists had our hopes in had just ascended. Yes, we can. And then he very quickly moved away from the progressives and from the climate work. we had the Waxman Markey bill in the US Congress, which a lot of my colleagues had worked on, which was the first climate bill. We had to wait 14 years for the next one, which was the recent one, the IRA, and that collapsed. It went through the House and it collapsed in the Senate. And 2009, I was sent to the Copenhagen Convention of Parties on Climate Change, the UN Convention of Parties, COP15. It is known as Brokenhagen because it was not a fun experience. And one of the things I learned being there in Copenhagen was that actually the reason why it collapsed was largely because of the US government. And so the trajectory of 2009 was really hard for any environmental activist that was based out of DC and doing US policy. But I think it was really hard too for people like me who had been told again and again that the way we achieved environmental solutions, a sustainable future, peace so that all living beings can live and thrive at the same time is through capitalism and through technology and through this concept of green growth and payment for economic services. And I'm putting all this out there because it's probably really familiar to some of you, right? And I think by the end of that year, what I realized was that I had lost faith in all of these things because all of these things I described is essentially people that we trusted who decided that the forces of capitalism benefited them, their nation, their in-group, whatever that is more, and that it just was not worth the cost being what was happening to the earth, what was happening to all living beings, what was happening to poor income, low income, right, BIPOC communities, global south, etc. And it's funny because talking about a crisis of faith, it can sound so easy and small, but if you've been through it, you know what that feels like. You just enter the pit of despair and you feel like anything you've ever worked on is pointless. And so in my case, the way first was the lots of crying and refusing to leave my bed and not bathing. That was part of the process. And then it really was returning to the people I trusted, the writers that had influenced me in the first place, that had just sort of given me any kind of courage I had as a young activist, as a young student. And one of the things I did was I returned to my own home landscape. I returned to the Himalayas and to Tibet. And I was, one of the places I went to is Nangchen, which is really famous because it's the birthplace for 3 of the major rivers in eastern China and in the eastern part of Asia. So it's the Yangtze, the Mekong, and the Yellow Rivers. They all come from this place. And I went up there with one of my teachers. And I went for 2 weeks, and I thought he was just going to tell me to meditate. But every morning, he would see my face. And it was probably like really swollen because I cried all night. And then he'd just be like, climb that mountain. And that was all I did for 2 weeks. I just would climb up this mountain crying the whole time. And then coming down, I'd be like, oh, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. Because there's no ropes, nothing to protect you. And then I'd come down. And somehow by the end of the 2 weeks, I regained faith. I regained faith in the earth. And I regained this sort of, what was born was this faith that life will continue. It might not look like what we know, right? It might not be what we hold dear. It might not be pristine in the way we like, any of those things, but life will continue because the earth is alive. And she loves life. I mean, if you think about the fact that there are 2+ million beetle species alone, right? Like how much she enjoys giving birth to life. And I think for me, that emotion has never left me since then. That was 2010. And it also made it really obvious that I would turn to faith leaders and start working with faith leaders. And so I essentially left the neoliberal model of green growth and moved towards working with faith leaders.
Thank you.
Cool.
That's a really cool story.
Yep. I think when I stopped riding in cars and living in California, where everyone is riding in cars and motorized vehicles. Uh, because of the oil spill, because of the damage, because of the birds, and people were emotionally like, oh, we've got to do something about this. I wish we didn't have to ride in these motorized vehicles. I'm going to give up my car. And people said things like that. And I gave up riding in cars. And people kind of went, John, what did you do? And I was like thinking, oh, they're all going to follow now. We're all going to start walking, and it's going to be this wonderful movement. And instead of that happening, no one did. And it was just me walking. And there I had made this decision to walk, and all of a sudden, I'm by myself walking on the road. And I was pissed. Because they said they were going to walk. They said they wanted to walk. And, you know, sometimes they would stop and ask if I wanted to ride. And my mom would say, because of your hard head, John, you wouldn't accept. And so I would not. And eventually they didn't stop anymore. They would just wave. Here's John walking. And so, yeah, I was kind of upset and like going, what is this going to do? What is walking? How did I get to this place? And then my birthday was coming up. The 20th was I was turning 27. And gosh, I had been listening to the Beatles, and there was a song, number 9, number 9, number 9. And I went, well, that's 3 nines, 27. I have to do something that's going to be different than what I've been doing. And I decided I just wouldn't speak for one day, because that was going to be the thing that was going to help me see something, I thought. And so I didn't speak when I turned 27. And yes, I did see something. And what I saw was that I had not been listening to anyone, that I thought I knew everything, because I was 27, I guess. And I decided that, my gosh, and it was a very sad day. The sad part of that was that I had missed all this opportunity to learn from so many people that I had just, because I thought I knew, I wouldn't listen. And the happy part of that is that, well, now, if I can just shut up, if I can just keep quiet, I can learn. And I will learn if I just listen. And so I did. I started listening. The sad part of that is that I couldn't explain that to my parents, who were in Philadelphia. So when I wrote my mom and dad that I had stopped speaking, and I had called them earlier and said, you know, I stopped riding in cars. I can't come home to Philadelphia to see you. And they thought, oh, that's so nice. I said, that'll last for a couple of weeks. And then I wrote and said, I can't, you know, I can't call you. They said, my mom wrote me, you know, and she said, your dad will be on the next plane. And he came out to see what was wrong. He thought I had been taken over by a strange religious cult in California. And he came out and he saw me. You know, I'd just been walking. I think I just walked up to Oregon, and I was on my way back. And he saw me, and he thought that, no, you seem okay. So go ahead, you can talk to me now. And you know, because nobody was there, and that's when I realized that, no, I'm really on this journey, and I'm not talking. Because my dad, I'm not getting in the car with him, and I was on this journey, and then I felt that I was alone. It was this feeling of loneliness, but that it was okay, because at one time I couldn't be alone. I had to have people around me, but now it was okay. I was going to learn to be alone, and so I spent lots of time walking alone in the wilderness areas and in the mountains, and that's what came out of that anger and that turmoil inside of me, and the silence took root. And when the silence took root, it became, since every year I would ask myself about the silence, it became just a living choice that I could live. And there were many times when, many challenges on that, but, those are other times. And I mean, there's always going to be a challenge. It just doesn't go smoothly. I made my choice and now it's going to just go. No, there's going to be, it's work. We're all going to have to work doing what we do. It's not just one decision and that's it. So that's.
Yeah. It's a very interesting emotion, specifically speaking about just like loneliness in general. I think I grew up with a teaching that I think, I'm presuming, of course, like I don't really know for sure, but a lot of other Native communities where a lot of the times I grew up and I was asked the question, am I being a good relative? Am I being a good person in relationship with, and most commonly it was in referencing to other human people, but then also at the same time it was also referencing like my relationship with nature, my relationship specifically with the trees. For some reason my family really loved trees. But like throughout thinking about that as I've gotten older and like doing my studies here at UW-Madison, you speak a lot about loneliness, and there's this weird balance that I have been kind of striving towards, where it's between communities and the responsibilities that come to the communities that you belong to, me belonging to my tribe, me belonging to the Native community here in Madison, me belonging to the Black community, me belonging to my family in Mississippi, like these sort of responsibilities that I have to them to be a good relative. But then I guess what I'm asking is, how do we maintain our self-identity while doing these things, because we each have a specific role to play. So you talk about loneliness, and we talk about hopelessness and crisis of faith and the struggle of a fight for your people, but then how do you make sure that you yourself still have that personal story and that personal identity? And I want to start at the end, if you have something right away. I know I just said, I shared a lot.
Since I appreciate you all going before, I will.
You'll take the step.
Yeah. I had walked across the United States, and I ended up speaking in Washington and working for the Coast Guard, writing oil pollution regulations, which was just amazing culmination of, wow, I've started walking 20 years ago. I stopped talking, and here I am in Washington, D.C. with a PhD writing the regulations for the United States oil spills. And I thought, well, that's a high point. And I went on sailing to the Caribbean and started walking the length of South America. And it wasn't until I was in Venezuela, and I was walking through this prison town. It's El Dorado. It was a very infamous prison. And the commandante was camped out earlier, and I camped out with him, and he said, when you go past our prison gate, they're going to challenge you. They're going to challenge you because we have lots of prison breaks. So just tell them who you are, show them your passport. But I, in my own mind, decided I wanted to be a criminal. I wanted to be a prisoner. I wanted to see if I could escape from this prison that I had made up. And so when I got to the gate of the prison, and the guard with an M16 pointed it at me, and he said, "Pasaporte, pasaporte." I looked at him and I go, "Passport? I don't need to show you my passport. It's in the bottom of my backpack." And anyway, I'm Dr. Francis. I'm a UN ambassador, and I'm walking around the world. And if you don't believe me, you can ask Comandante Jesus. And he just looked at me, and he didn't shoot, which was good. So I can tell you the story. So I just kind of kept walking in the road, in the forest, kind of got around me and I was out of sight of the gate. And I just jumped up and I said, "Free at last, thank God Almighty, free at last." I'm taking this right from Martin Luther King, right? And I'm stopped and I go, what are you doing? Because it wasn't even like me to want to do something like that, to try to, what was that about? And it took me about 100 more miles of walking to realize that I was in prison. I was in prison of my own making, that the walking had become a prison to me. Because unlike the silence, which every year on my birthday I would say, is this still appropriate? Does this still work? Is this still who I am? I never said that about walking. I just walked. That's what I was doing. It was never over. And I left my parents and they never expected to see me again. And I thought, well, I'm not going to see them again either, because they're older and I'm walking around the world. That's going to be a long time. And so I got to this place. I said in my mind, I said, you're going to have to let yourself start using motorized vehicles. And how's that going to look? What's going to happen to your identity as the person who walks? You're the person who only walks. And I said, wow, this is really So I decided that when I got to Brazil, I was going to get in a car and fly home, get in a truck or a bus or whatever, and go to the airport and fly home, which I did. But it let me build something else, another identity of what Planet Walk was and what me as the Planet Walker. Yeah, I do use motorized vehicles, because if I had stayed doing what I was doing, I think it would have crushed the spirit of what it is that allowed me to be this person. And so I flew home and scared the hell out of my parents. And I knocked on the door, and my dad looked at me and he said, "That's two. This is the happiest Christmas of my life." And he said that's two because when I started talking, he said, "That's one." And he always wanted me to be able to ride in cars, and that would be two. And I said, "That's two. And this is the happiest Christmas of my life." And I had called up my father and told, I'm going to send my friend Fouad, who was a student here from Tunisia. He's going to come and see you on Christmas just to make sure that they were, isn't he Muslim though? I said, you know Fouad, he comes and sees you, and it doesn't matter what. And so I knocked on my door. My dad said, "Your mother's waiting for you." I walked upstairs to see my mother, and she said, "Fouad, we're so glad to see you." Fouad is, she looked at me, she said, "Fouad, you know you look a lot like our son Johnny." "You are our son Johnny." And then she started crying, and I started crying. And I'm glad I got on the plane and flew home. I'm glad things worked out the way they did, and that I did take care of this person and our community. Because my dad and my mother, they was with me wherever I walked. Whenever I walked somewhere, they were always with me. And my dad come and visit me, so did my mom. So anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Thank you. We're gonna go down the line this way. I'm not gonna point anymore.
Is it just me, or does everybody want to take a vow of silence and just listen to him talk for the rest of it? I'm just going to sit cross-legged over here like a little kid and just stop being up here. What was the question? No, no, I'm kidding. Identity has been a thing that I have struggled with my entire life. And so I think to that point, because I was adopted. And I was adopted into a family that did not look like me, which is why I think I have been incredibly assertive about creating a space that is safe and welcoming for those that do. And that is an interesting juxtaposition at times, being expected to act or to speak or to perform or to be a certain way, when viscerally at your very soul, you know perhaps you're not the way that others expect you to be. And I think that to maintain your identity, to maintain who you know you are and who your ancestors know you are, in the face of those who see you and want you or expect you to be a different way, it's an ongoing daily struggle. And so in the process of trying to do all the things for the environment, I think one of the things that has always resonated with me is, nature doesn't care. Nature supports and encourages and loves you no matter what. And I think that that's something that has always driven my identity, in the sense of I need to mirror that. I need to be that welcoming, inviting, encouraging, supportive human in the process of getting that from the space around me. We don't always get that from the people around us. And often we have to remind ourselves, and I was reminded so eloquently last night, again, I wanted to just sit and listen all day long. Be kind, because that's really not just all you can do, but that's all you should do. And I think that that's something that has always kept it in balance for me in the process of, in the face of adversity, in the face of doing these things, in the face of working in the various capacities and the jobs that you have. That's not your identity. It can be an expression of part of who you are, but it isn't who you are. And so spending my entire life in spaces where I've had to explain over and over again, spending my entire life in spaces where people, because of my tiny stature,
No, you're
they expect you to be a certain way or to act a certain way or to do certain things. But that wasn't who I was. So to constantly not have to constantly argue with people over and over again, but to just do your best to illustrate and to lead by example and to see and to encourage when you see good things. And that was a constant reminder to me. That's, the energy that you put out is the energy you get back. And so that kept things in balance for me. Yeah.
Thank you.
I really struggle with this question.
Yeah.
I really did. So much of Buddhist practice is about emptiness, and I think in the Catholic transcendental kind of space, it's like the emptying of self. In some ways, you almost create this kind of psychological distancing of your own identity, as part of the practice. And so I think similar to what Chris was saying, I am biracial. I grew up being very different all the time. I was the weird kid, right? I was the kid whose mother had become a nun in the height of her career and then disappeared. And then I remember there was a poetry contest, and I was the kid that got up and read this god-awful poem about not being born. And it was just like everything about my childhood, when I remember it, is like, oh, I was that weird kid that we all know, right? And it meant that I became a chameleon really quickly. And it meant that I became a joker very quickly. I went to boarding school, and instantly I was like, oh, I'm going to get beaten up a lot, or I can make a lot of jokes and make people laugh, right? These are my two choices. And I think there are lots of pros and cons to that, to being that kind of chameleon. Very good at peacekeeping, as it turns out. Very good at decreasing conflict and kind of, being able to fit in a lot of groups so you can talk to a lot of different kind of people. And then struggling to feel at home with any group, and feeling at home with a conceptual idea of community versus real community. And those are all things I've really struggled with throughout my life. Great age of 50 now, and I look back, and what I see is when I talked about that conflict of crisis I had the crisis of faith I had in 2009, it made me shed all of those things. And when I was young, my mother used to say all the time to me in my language, get out of your own way. And I never understood what she meant, I'd just be like, I am you know how you talk to your mom. You know, that was always, and it took me till 2009 to suddenly realize that all of these concerns I had about identity, it was what John was describing. I created this prison because I was telling myself every single day, I'm different. I don't fit in. I have to make people laugh. I have to, right? Like, these were all things I was reinforcing in myself. And it's sort of how I became fascinated by the narratives we tell ourselves and by the creation stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. You know, we pick up these things that other people tell us that they remember about us, and they become more true than our own memories, right? And so that year of running up the mountain and then gripping and coming down crying, it just kind of made me drop a lot of those things. And I realized the only thing that mattered to me and the only thing that was authentically me was this desire to be of service to the earth. Like, that was the only thing that actually was authentically 1,000% mine and me. And everything else was interexchangeable for me. I literally was like, you can take this, you can, depending on the situation, I can kind of barter with you what to keep and what not to keep. But that part was non-negotiable. And that is the spiritual core of who I am. And I still joke like crazy, and I still kind of, I think, do the chameleon thing all the time. And I'm sometimes embarrassed because other people switch their accents when they speak to me. If I'm in, you know, somewhere else and I start picking up my Sikkimese accent, and then I found out I do this. Oh my gosh, it's not just white people doing this to me. It turns out I fake other people's accents too. So that's been a whole learning experience for me for how much of a chameleon I am. But at the core of it, the spiritual core of it, the non-negotiable core of it is so free because I'm always rooted to the earth. And everything's okay because of that.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll start with this. My dad was a drill sergeant in the Marines. We'll start with that. I have no visible scars. No, he was nice. But our tribe, the Menominee Nation, has the largest percentage of service, of military service, of all counties. It used to be in the United States, absent a county that maybe has a military base, you know, encompassing the whole base. But I remember Dad told me when I was younger, he told my two brothers also, he said, you guys, you don't have to go into the service. Huh? He said, there are many ways to be a warrior. He said, and in some ways, it's the same thing. A true warrior takes care of his family, takes care of himself and his family and his community and his nation in that order. They need to take care of that, because if your family and your community is not strong, then your community is weak. If you're not taking care of your share of the people you should be taking care of. So when he started pulling that to us, then that was awesome. Then he tells me, they tell me, you were meant for something else. So made sure I went to college. At college, when I come back, see, the way we think, we're the pitiful ones. Humans are the pitiful ones. We're the last of the creation to come onto this earth. And the animals all had to, in our stories, all had to talk and say, who's going to take care of those humans, you know? That's a sorry bunch there. They said, we have to take care of them. And we had individual animals come up and say that. They said they would work with us, watch us. And one of those, for instance, was the white-tailed deer. And to this day, when I see a deer and it comes forward, doesn't matter how many points, how big its antlers are, it's there and it's telling me, I'm offering myself to you. That's that pact we have. I will feed your babies and take care of you. Shoot me and eat me. And then your responsibility is to take care of the land and my fawns, my babies, as they get older, as they're older. That's your responsibility. So in all of the foods we have, that's within that there is that reciprocity. And it's not fake. It's not a tree hugger thing, People talk like that. It's real. That's what I have to do. And that's part of my responsibility, but the tribe thinks that way. And we're different. First time I went to legislature, and by the way, not only are humans the pitiful, guys are the most, humans, males are the most pitiful of all then. Because women are the creators of life. They have that special power to have and keep humans alive, to have babies. So when you see Menominee, and this is not with all tribes, but when you see Menominee and we are speaking, we're the ones that sit on the drums and sing certain songs. There's certain things we do, that's because we're the ones who needs the help the most with those prayers. That is why. And certain times you see women sitting around the drum behind the singers who are sitting at the drum. They have that certain power and they can protect you. So I know my place in this world, but it's a good place. When I first became chairman, I had a lot of aunties, uncles that come forward and they said, now you remember, when you make decisions, that the deer can't raise his hoof and say, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to disagree with that move, that ordinance you're developing here, and here's why. They can't say that. We have to know that. We have to understand that and be a part of that. And one of my uncles even said, does a dog defecate on his own bed where he lays? Well, of course not. Although I had a miniature wiener dog that once. But that's different, way different. Anyways, but they say that you can't ruin that water. And you need to leave this world one step better, minimally, than what you got. So that's what I'm trying to do in dealing with what we have. And when I speak and accepted to speak here today, there's a reason. We're systems thinkers. And you see Menominee come forward and talk. Well, the reason is that little child over there and his parents, that child may grow up to be our next governor or president, or might be on a school board or whatever. The parents know, they've heard things and they can share things. We're imparting things to that individual instead of keeping those away. And that's what we try to do in everything we do. So I know I have that responsibility then to take care of the world, to understand I'm a part of it. And if I hurt any part of that world, I'm hurting myself and I'm hurting my babies, because it's not just relationships that you have in front of us today, but it's those generations from now. We're still related to them. Just because you can't see them and hug them, those grandkids, you're still responsible for that. And you have a responsibility to make the world better for them. Time is made up. That's a made up concept. It's really a medicine.
Thank you. That was really beautiful. I'm sitting with a lot. I'm sitting with a lot of words, a lot of thoughts. But we're coming to a close for our panel today, and I just want to say one more thing. I got one more question for everybody. It's going to be a quick one, though. So, as we all know, a good forest, soil, ecosystem, environment, a good panel, is a combination of good ingredients. I always grew up with good people doing good things creates a good home. So when thinking about the future, when thinking about those future generations and what we want for them, what could I have each of you name one ingredient that you see in that future good home that we're thinking about when we do all this environmental work, when we think about climate courage, like looking to that future generation, like just name one ingredient that you think is most important in that good soil, that good forest. Hey.
I know, don't make eye contact.
I know.
I already ruined it. Well, mine is rose-colored glasses. Think through that. When they talk about natives being stoic, what we're really taught is, if I see across the room and I'm a person who loves money, who's greedy, who's selfish, whatever, I see a tree. I don't see a tree and everything that benefits that it brings to the ground, to everything. I see, well, there's a lot of good timber there, and I could probably do X, Y, or Z with that. If you're a jealous person, and that's how you are, you see your husband or your wife across the room talking with somebody, and you're thinking, oh, they're cheating, or are they planning something? They could be planning your surprise birthday party. So we're told, take those veils away, take Western science away from your eyes and see things. And if you can do that, then you can see things that really exist. And that's important. We see or don't see things because we know Western science. And we say, oh, that couldn't have been real. You might have saw something. So.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go down the line.
I think for me, it's having a sense of perspective that comes from kind of embracing our impermanence, you know? Like, something I say a lot is that we're here, we are born here on this planet, we live here, we hopefully all of us thrive here, but eventually we all pass, right? And when we pass, we become one with the earth, you know? We decompose, it's so cool. We become part of all these cycles of life. And remembering that our time here is short hopefully means that we try to do less of the leading and more of the listening, and we try to do less of the owning and the, you know, needing to, I don't know, go on a rocket and go up on space. All these recent things that are in my mind. We need to do that less, and what we actually really dedicate ourselves to do is to be in service of one another, of community, of the planet, right? And that in many ways, the horrors that are being unleashed right now is coming because people won't accept that their time is limited. And they need to amass all kinds of power and all kinds of things at the cost of everybody else, right? And the only way we can respond to that is with a sense of perspective. We're here for a short time. And what do we do with that time? And hopefully that becomes a source of courage for all of us, right? Let's not waste our time.
Chris?
You said a word.
A word.
Just one ingredient.
Oh, shoot.
You can do a
Did you say
phrase.
One ingredient. I would say the ingredient is lead with why and wonder. Constantly ask why. We get annoyed as adults with young people asking why, and that's the most ridiculous thing that we've ever learned to do, is to be annoyed with inquiry, right? And never lose your sense of wonder. There are folks in this audience who I've heard wonderful, wonderful questions from. There are people in this audience that I've annoyed with wonderful, wonderful questions. and I think that that's incredibly important to never lose that awe and that wonder in life. Yeah.
Thank you. You got to close out.
Wow. when I walked across America and finally got to Washington to start speaking, it was because I survived, not only survived walking across America as a black person, but I thrived. And I thrived because of kindness. That kindness seemed to transcend politics and race and all the things that we use to separate us, to make us different from each other. That for some reason people were kind to me. And I believe that kindness is something that we all need every day, and that if we practice it, a lot of what we see as environmental conundrum that we're in will dissolve. I mean, we'll still have work to do in measuring things and understanding stories and, you know, that we get from listening to each other and from the science. But I wanted to say and talk about kindness and how it's important for all of us. So when I started speaking, that was my, I guess, message was that kindness and how we treated each other was what was most important for us. And the one word is kindness. I mean, I could put that into all kinds of different things, like, you know, human rights, and, well, that's being kind to each other, you know, and civil kindness, you know, equity, kindness. It's all about that. But even that one word isn't just that easy, you know, that it's because it's one word and you go, oh, come on, kindness, is that it? Well, yeah, but it's a practice. And if we can practice it, it's work. And I think that kindness is the word. Kindness is what I believe will free us all from where we are trapped.
Thank you for ending on such a beautiful note. I want to give just like a big thanks to the people who I was able to be in conversation with. To be honest, forgot they were here. I feel like I'm walking like off the stage, like my head's so heavy because you've all said such beautiful things and I was taking note of it all. But before I came up here today, like I put down some tobacco and I said, Waskanex Nus Leo, which is I wish for good minds, and I feel like you all delivered in my prayer, so I want to thank you in that and say Yahweh, and then give them a last big round of applause.